The sound was wrong. Sergeant Marcus Calloway heard it before anyone else in the trench line. That grinding mechanical shriek that had haunted his sleep for 11 weeks. But the pitch had changed. Deeper now. More controlled. The ramshackle engines that had announced the first wave back in the harvest season had screamed like wounded animals, all chaos and fury. This new sound carried purpose. Private Deacon Whitmore was asking him something about ammunition distribution, but Marcus held up a hand for silence. He pressed his ear against the ferrocrete wall of the bunker, feeling the vibration through the chemical-treated stone. The rhythm was different too, steadier, less like a mob charging and more like a heartbeat. They learned. The thought came unbidden, and Marcus crushed it immediately. Orks did not learn. Every briefing, every tactical doctrine, every reassurance from command said the same thing. The greenskins were beasts, driven by primitive instinct and bloodlust. They hit hard, they hit fast, and they broke against prepared defenses like water against stone. That was the theory, that was what the manuals promised. The manuals had never spent 3 months on Forge Line 7. Marcus moved through the communication trench at a crouch, his boots sucking at the mud that never quite dried despite the filtration pumps working around the clock. 1,800 meters of defensive work stretched along the ridge, protecting the tertiary coolant facility that fed the manufactory district below. Not a glamorous posting, not a strategic priority. Just another line on another map that someone in the planning offices had deemed worth holding. Worth holding meant worth dying for. The distinction escaped him. He reached the observation post at the eastern terminus, where Corporal Yolanda Briggs sat hunched over a battered auger unit. The screen flickered with interference, green static washing across the display in waves that matched the approaching engine sound. "Something is jamming us," Briggs said without looking up. "Started 20 minutes ago. Getting worse. They did not have jammers before, I know." Marcus took the magnoculars from their hook and climbed the 3 rungs to the firing step. The plane stretched before him, pock-marked with craters from previous engagements and littered with the rusting hulks of destroyed vehicles. Ork corpses rotted in heaps where the heavy stubbers had caught them in the open during the second wave. The bodies had been there for 6 weeks. No one had the manpower to clear them, and the Orks did not seem to care about their dead. Through the magnoculars he found the source of the sound. A column of vehicles was emerging from the fungal forest that marked the edge of the green zone, the territory the Orks had claimed after overrunning the outer perimeter during the initial invasion. The vehicles were wrong. The first wave had come in scrap-built trucks, barely held together with welded plates and enthusiasm. They had driven in straight lines, engines screaming at maximum throttle, presenting perfect targets for the lascannons. Marcus had watched 36 of them explode in the first 30 seconds of that engagement. Easy kills, righteous slaughter. These new vehicles traveled in a staggered formation. They used the craters for cover. Their engines ran at a controlled speed that suggested something had calculated optimal approach velocity versus defensive response time. "Briggs," Marcus said, his voice flat, "get me a line to command. The Vox is dead. The jamming. Then send a runner." He heard her boots squelching away through the mud, heard her shout for Private Chen, heard the fear in her voice that she could not quite hide. Marcus kept watching the column advance, counting vehicles, noting their modifications. The armor was different. Thicker plates welded at angles instead of flat surfaces. He had seen that design before, in the training hollows that showed Imperial tank. Construction. Sloped armor deflected energy weapons more effectively than perpendicular plating. Basic physics, the kind of thing a cogitator might calculate if given enough data. Orks did not have cogitators. They did not calculate. They did not learn. But Marcus remembered what happened after the second wave. That assault had come 3 weeks after the first, and the greenskins had changed their approach. Instead of trucks, they brought walkers, crude bipedal machines that stomped across the crater field with enough mass to trigger the anti-vehicle mines buried in the approach lanes. The mines had done their job, blowing legs off the walkers and sending their crews tumbling into the mud. But the detonations had cleared paths through the minefield, paths that infantry had exploited, pouring through the gaps in green-skinned waves. They lost the outer trench line that day. Sergeant Vasquez had died holding the communication junction, buying time for the rest of the company to fall back to the secondary positions. His body was still out there somewhere, probably picked clean by now. After the second wave, Command had sent reinforcements. 50 fresh conscripts and a promise of armored support that never materialized. The conscripts had helped rebuild the defenses, extending the trench network, adding new bunkers, installing the quad-mounted heavy stubbers that Marcus had requisitioned 6 times before anyone bothered to respond. The third wave came with vehicles that hugged the ground, too low for the stubbers to depress their barrels far enough to track. They had watched the greenskins adapt. Marcus lowered the magnoculars and descended from the firing step. The approaching column would reach effective engagement range in approximately 12 minutes. 12 minutes to prepare defenses against an enemy that had already studied those defenses and found ways around them. "Stand to," he ordered, his voice carrying along the trench. "Full alert. Heavy weapons teams to primary positions." The words felt hollow. He had given the same orders 4 times before, and each time the Orks had found new ways to make them insufficient. In the main bunker, Corporal Theodore Marsh was already organizing the ammunition distribution, his prosthetic left arm whirring as he lifted crates that would have required 2 men before his injury during the third wave. The augmetic was crude work, field installed by a Medicae who had died the following week. It clicked and ground with every movement, a constant reminder of what the greenskins had cost them. "How many this time?" Marsh asked without pausing in his work. Marcus considered lying. Boosting morale with optimistic estimates, the manuals recommended maintaining unit cohesion through positive messaging. More than last time, better equipped. Marsh nodded, accepting the information with the weary resignation of a man who had stopped hoping weeks ago. "How much better?" "They copied our tank armor design." The corporal's prosthetic arm froze mid-motion, hydraulics hissing. "That took 3 weeks. The technical briefing said it took cogitators and proper forge facilities months to develop new armor patterns. They do not have cogitators. No, they do not." The silence stretched between them, filled only by the growing engine sound from outside. Marcus found himself counting heartbeats, measuring the time until contact in the rhythm of his own pulse. Private Deacon Whitmore appeared in the bunker entrance, his young face pale beneath the accumulated grime of months in the trenches. "Sergeant, something is happening in the prisoner pit." Marcus felt his stomach clench. The pit was their failure, their shame, the thing Command did not know about, because no one had found a way to explain it in terms that would not result in summary execution. "Show me." They moved through the secondary trench system, past the makeshift Medicae station where Doc Ingram was preparing for casualties, past the ammunition depot with its carefully rationed supplies, past the memorial wall where someone had scratched the names of the dead into the ferrocrete. There were more names than wall now. They had started writing smaller. The prisoner pit was exactly what the name suggested, a hole in the ground 3 meters deep, covered with a grating of salvaged metal. It held the thing they had captured during the 4th wave, the thing that should not exist. Marcus looked down through the grating at the figure huddled in the corner of the pit. Specialist First Class Jerome Patterson had been missing for 18 days after the 4th wave before they found him wandering in the crater field, walking toward the Ork lines. He had not resisted capture, had not spoken a word since they dragged him back to the trenches, had simply sat in whatever corner they put him in, rocking slowly, humming fragments of songs that no one recognized. He was humming now, but the tune had changed. It matched the rhythm of the approaching Ork engines perfectly. Whitmore's voice was barely a whisper. He started doing that an hour ago, right when the jamming began. How long was he in the green zone? 18 days. You know that, Sergeant. I'm asking what he saw in 18 days, what they did to him. Patterson looked up from the pit, his eyes meeting Marcus's through the grating. The man smiled, and Marcus saw that his teeth had been filed to points. That was new. He had been checking the prisoner daily, and that was new as of this morning. They learn, Patterson said, his voice rusty from weeks of silence. They learn us, study us, break us down into little pieces and see how we fit together. Then they build better. Better what? Everything. The engine sound was louder now, close enough that Marcus could distinguish individual vehicles in the rumbling cacophony. He knelt beside the grating, ignoring the mud soaking through his uniform trousers. What did they do to you, Patterson? The prisoner's smile widened, exposing more of those sharpened teeth. They let me watch. That was the worst part. They could have killed me, should have killed me, but they wanted me to see how they work, how they think. He pressed his face against the grating from below, and Marcus saw the tracery of scars covering his scalp, patterns carved into the skin with surgical precision. They opened my head, Sergeant, not to hurt me, to understand. They wanted to know how we plan, how we predict, how we decide. Marcus felt something cold settle into his chest. And then they let you go. They let me bring it back. Bring what back? The answer, the lesson, the truth they wanted you to learn. Patterson's humming resumed, louder now, more insistent. They know everything about this position, every bunker, every weapon, every man. I told them. I did not want to, but they have ways of making you want to. They have things they put in your brain that make you love them. The alarm klaxons began wailing, drowning out the rest of whatever Patterson might have said. Marcus was already running toward the primary firing line, shouting orders that felt meaningless against the rising thunder of Ork engines. They reached the bunker as the first vehicles crested the ridgeline 500 meters out. Through the vision slit, Marcus watched the assault unfold with a cold, clinical eye, cataloging the differences from previous attacks. The vehicles were not charging, they were advancing in echelon formation, each wave providing cover for the ones behind. The lead machines drew fire from the heavy stubbers, their sloped armor deflecting rounds that would have punched through the previous generation of Ork construction. While the defenders focused on the front line, secondary elements were flanking along the pre-cleared paths through the minefield. They brought sappers in the fourth wave, Private Chen reported from the left observation post. They mapped our mines. Lascannon engaged the flanking elements, Marcus ordered. The Lascannon spoke, a searing beam of light that punched through one of the flanking vehicles and detonated its crude ammunition stores. The explosion sent debris flying, but the other vehicles in the flanking group did not scatter. They adjusted course, moving to use the burning wreck as cover. They should be fleeing, Corporal Briggs said, her voice cracking. They always break when we kill one. Not anymore, Marcus replied. The assault lasted 47 minutes. 47 minutes of continuous combat, of ammunition expenditure rates that the logistics manifests could not sustain, of watching the Orks adapt in real time to every defensive measure the trenches could offer. When the heavy stubbers overheated from sustained fire, the greenskins pushed forward. When the stubbers came back online, the Orks retreated just far enough to avoid effective engagement. They were timing the cooling cycles. When the Lascannon focused on one sector, Ork elements elsewhere advanced. When the beam swung to meet the new threat, the original group resumed their approach. They were coordinating across the battlefield. When Marcus ordered the flamer teams forward to clear a breach in the left trench section, the Orks withdrew from that area entirely, refusing to engage in close quarters where human weapons held the advantage. They were selecting their battles. The sun was setting by the time the greenskins pulled back to the fungal forest, leaving behind a carpet of bodies that somehow seemed smaller than previous assaults. Marcus climbed to the observation post and counted the wrecked vehicles. 11 destroyed, 27 retreated intact. The math was wrong. The fourth wave had lost 60 vehicles in a single afternoon. This assault had been more organized, more effective, more successful by every metric except raw casualty numbers. They achieved their objective, a voice said behind him. Marcus turned to find Doc Ingram standing in the trench, her surgical apron still stained from treating the wounded. Her face was gray with exhaustion, but her eyes were sharp with the same understanding that was clawing at Marcus's mind. What objective, information? They were testing us, probing our responses, mapping our defensive patterns. She gestured toward the carnage on the plain. They sacrificed those vehicles to learn how we fight. 11 vehicles for a complete tactical analysis. We do not know that. I know it because I talked to Patterson. Before you found him in the pit when they first brought him back, I did the medical evaluation. He told me things I have been trying to convince myself were trauma-induced delusions. Her voice dropped. They have a hierarchy, Sergeant, not just war bosses and boys. There are ones that think. Planners, strategists. They call them different things in different tribes, but they exist, and they are studying us like we would study them. The engine sound began again in the distance, already changing pitch as the Ork mechanics modified their vehicles based on the day's observations. How long before the next assault? Marcus asked. Patterson says 3 days. They need time to implement what they learned. 3 days. He had 3 days to prepare for an enemy that had already analyzed his defenses and would return with counters to everything he might prepare. The reinforcements from command, he said. When are they coming? Doc Ingram's expression told him everything before she spoke. I intercepted a coded transmission before the jamming got too strong. Command has reclassified this position. As what? Observation Post 774. Long-term defensive research station. She swallowed hard. They are not sending reinforcements because they want to see how long we can hold. They want to study the Ork adaptation process. We are the experiment. The sound of the Ork engines faded into the night, leaving behind a silence that felt like being buried alive. Marcus spent the next 72 hours implementing every defensive modification he could conceive. New trenches dug at irregular angles, weapon positions relocated, false bunkers constructed from empty crates and salvaged plating. Anything to confuse the Orks' tactical assessment from the previous engagement. He knew it was futile. Patterson had told him everything in the prisoner pit during those 3 nights, whispering through the grating in a voice that grew more alien with each passing hour. The greenskin strategists did not just learn from battle. They learned from everything. The pattern of smoke from the cooking fires told them how many soldiers were eating. The rhythm of sentries pacing the walls told them rotation schedules. The pitch of shouted orders told them chain of command structures. They knew us before the first shot, Patterson whispered on the second night, his filed teeth gleaming in the darkness. They had watched us for weeks, months, learning our language, understanding our signals. They let us think we were holding them back because they were not ready. Now they are ready. Ready for what? The final lesson, the one they have been building toward since we first landed on this world. They want to prove something, not just to us, to themselves, to whatever passes for their gods. They want to prove that they can beat the best, that they can learn anything, become anything. We are not the best. We are a garrison force on a tertiary logistics station. Patterson's laugh was horrible, a grinding sound that came from somewhere deep in his mutilated chest. You were the best they could find. A defensive specialist with combat commendations, a team of veterans who survived 4 waves, an entrenched position with overlapping fields of fire. They chose you specifically, Sergeant. You are their final examination. The third day dawned grey and cold, mist rolling in from the fungal forest like the breath of some enormous sleeping creature. Marcus stood at the observation post and listened to the silence. No engines, no war cries, nothing. But the wind and the distant grinding of manufacturing machinery from the facility below. Briggs, status on the auger. Still jammed, Sergeant. Has been since the last attack. I cannot tell what is out there. Marcus raised the magnoculars and scanned the tree line. The mist obscured everything beyond 200 meters, turning the world into a grey soup, punctuated by the dark shapes of destroyed vehicles from previous engagements. Something moved in the mist. He adjusted focus, trying to resolve the shape. It was too tall for an orc on foot, too narrow for a vehicle. It moved with a strange jerking gait, like something learning to walk. Contact front, he called. All positions stand ready. The shape emerged from the mist, and Marcus felt his hands go numb on the magnoculars. It was a walker, but not the crude stomping machines that had marked the second wave. This was something different, something that moved with fluid grace, its limbs articulating at angles that should have been impossible for orc construction. The cockpit was enclosed, sleek, almost elegant in a brutal way. It looked like Imperial design. Specifically, it looked like a sentinel walker, the kind of light reconnaissance vehicle that proper military forces deployed for patrol duties. The Orks had seen sentinels. They had destroyed 3 of them during the initial invasion, picking apart the wreckage for salvage, but they had never built anything like this before. More shapes emerged from the mist, dozens of them, all moving in perfect coordination, spacing exactly maintained, approach angle calculated to present minimal target profile. They copied our sentinels. Corporal Marsh breathed from somewhere behind him. They actually copied them. No. Marcus lowered the magnoculars. They improved them. The attack came not from the front but from beneath. The tunneling had begun weeks ago during the second wave, when the Orks had learned that human defenders focused on surface threats. They had dug for months, extending their excavations beneath the trenches, timing their completion to coincide with the Walker assault. The first bunker collapsed at 0847 hours. The ground simply fell away, taking Private Whitmore and 3 others into a pit filled with waiting greenskins. Their screams lasted less than 30 seconds. By 0900, the entire eastern section of the trench network was compromised. Orks poured up from below while the walkers advanced from above, catching the defenders in a perfect pincer movement. Marcus fought. That was all that remained. Training and instinct and the stubborn refusal to die easily. He killed 6 greenskins in the communication trench before a blow from behind knocked him to his knees. He killed 2 more from the ground before something heavy and green knocked the lasgun from his hands. They did not kill him. He woke in darkness that stank of fungus and machine oil, his wrists bound with wire that cut into his flesh with every movement. The sound surrounded him, that grinding mechanical rhythm that had marked every orc assault, but now he could hear the complexity within it. Individual engines working in concert, coordinated systems, a mechanical orchestra performing a symphony of war. Light stabbed into his eyes as a hatch opened above. Green fingers reached down and hauled him upward into a space that defied everything he thought he knew about orc construction. The chamber was organized, tools hung on racks, sorted by size and function. Workbenches held half-completed projects, each one a crude but recognizable copy of Imperial technology. Cogitators salvaged from destroyed vehicles hummed quietly in alcoves, Their machine spirits enslaved to purposes their creators never intended. And at the center of it all, surrounded by screens displaying tactical data from the battle, sat something that Marcus had been told could not exist. It was an orc, but not like any he had fought. Smaller than a warrior, hunched and withered, with eyes that gleamed. With something far too close to intelligence. Its skull was elongated, swollen, covered with the same pattern of scars that had marked Patterson's scalp. Wires ran from socket in its temples to the surrounding cogitators, pumping information directly into its twisted brain. "You understand now," it said in low Gothic, the words clear but wrong, pronounced with an alien tongue that had learned human speech through study rather than culture. "You see what we are, what we can become." Marcus said nothing. There was nothing to say. "Your kind thinks we are beasts." The creature rose from its seat, moving with a grace that belied its hunched posture, "that we fight without purpose, without plan, without growth." It gestured to the screens showing the tactical analysis of the trench assault. "But we are the perfect warriors. We evolve through conflict. Each battle makes us stronger. Each enemy teaches us new lessons." A new screen flickered to life, showing footage that Marcus recognized with sick horror. The view was from inside the trenches, from Patterson's eyes. The thing they had put in his brain had recorded everything, every defensive position, every weapon emplacement, every tactical decision. "Your fortress was a classroom," the Orc strategist continued. "Your resistance was our curriculum. Your deaths will be our graduation." "Why?" Marcus managed through cracked lips. "Why tell me this?" The creature's smile was the worst thing he had ever seen because it was so nearly human. "Because you will return to your kind. You will tell them what you saw. You will spread the lesson we have prepared." It leaned close, close enough that Marcus could smell the fungal stench of its breath. "Fear teaches faster than any weapon. When your commanders learn what we can become, they will send their best against us, their strongest, their most creative, and you will learn from them too. Everything teaches us." The Orc spread its arms, encompassing the workshop, a conquered fortress, the entire world, every bullet, every tactic, every mistake. "Your Imperium has been fighting for 10,000 years. 10,000 years of warfare, of strategy, of evolution. It tapped the swollen dome of its skull, and we absorb it all. Every lesson you have ever learned, we will learn faster, better, more completely, because that is what we are. The perfect students of destruction." The screens around the room changed, showing new designs, weapons based on patterns Marcus had never seen, vehicles incorporating technologies that seemed impossible for greenskin construction, plans for assaults on facilities that had nothing to do with Forge Line 7. They had been studying the entire sector, learning from every engagement across the planet, building toward something larger than one defensive position. "You were practice," the strategist said, confirming his worst fears. "A small lesson before the real examination begins. Your commanders think they contained us here, in this one zone. They do not understand that we wanted to be contained. We needed time to study, to prepare, to evolve." Its eyes glittered with terrible anticipation. "Tomorrow we begin the true war, and everything we learned from you will help us win it." The screens showed tactical projections for a planetary assault, coordinated strikes on manufacturing facilities, communication hubs, command centers. Every target selected based on patterns the Orks had extracted from captured prisoners, intercepted transmissions, observed behaviors. They had learned the entire Imperial defense network by studying one trench line. They released him at dawn, pushing him out into the ruins of Forge Line 7 with nothing but the clothes on his back and the knowledge burning in his skull. Behind him, the Ork war machine was already mobilizing, engines roaring in that terrible coordinated rhythm as vehicles moved out toward targets across the sector. Marcus stood in the mud where his bunker had been and watched the greenskin army deploy. They moved like a proper military force now, formations maintained, communications coordinated, objectives prioritized. They had learned everything, and somewhere in the fungal forest, in a workshop filled with stolen technology and enslaved machine spirits, the Ork strategist was already analyzing his release, already calculating what information he would share with command, already planning how to use human fear as another weapon in its arsenal, because that was the lesson, that was the truth Patterson had tried to warn him about. The Orks did not just learn tactics, they learned psychology. They understood that a traumatized survivor spreading tales of greenskin intelligence would do more damage than any assault. They knew that fear would make commanders hesitate, second-guess, overcommit to defense. They were using him even now, even in defeat, even in his desperate stumbling flight toward the next Imperial position. Marcus kept walking anyway. There was nothing else to do. He would report what he had seen. He would watch the skepticism in his superiors' eyes. He would feel the frustration as they dismissed his warnings as trauma-induced paranoia. And somewhere behind him, the Orks would be watching, learning, adapting, getting ready for the next lesson. The grinding of engines faded into the distance as Marcus crested the ridge overlooking the secondary defensive line. Below he could see the trenches still intact, the soldiers still believing they were safe. They had perhaps 3 hours before the assault began. 3 hours before everything they thought they knew became obsolete. He started running,